known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. And I don't think anybody really called it the Ghost Army during the war. I think
It's August 1944. Somewhere in northern France, a German Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilot banks his aircraft over Allied lines and photographs what appears to be an American armored division. Hundreds of Sherman tanks, artillery batteries, supply convoys, tens of thousands of soldiers, massed and ready to strike. He radios back to German High Command. Within hours, an entire panzer division is redirected to meet this threat. There is no armored division. Every tank in that photograph is made of inflatable rubber. Every artillery piece is a painted canvas shell. The soldiers, all 1,100 of them, are painters, sculptors, sound engineers, and Broadway set designers. And they just saved 30,000 American lives without firing a single shot. This is the Ghost Army, and their story was classified for over 50 years. By late 1943, Allied planners in London faced a problem that no amount of firepower could solve. They didn't have enough men. The coming invasion of Europe would require moving millions of soldiers across hundreds of miles of front. Every time a real division shifted position, German intelligence detected it and shifted to match. The Allies were visible, predictable, and paying for it in blood. What they needed was a way to be in two places at once. To make Germany believe a massive force was here, while the real force struck somewhere else entirely. Two American officers, Major Ralph Ingersoll, a celebrity journalist, and Colonel Billy Harris, had an idea so unusual it almost wasn't approved. What if they could make the Germans see an army that didn't exist? The United States Army went to art school. Recruiters visited the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Pratt Institute in New York, design agencies and Broadway set shops. They were looking for painters, sculptors, architects, engineers, actors, and advertising men. Men who could build illusions and sell them under pressure. Among those recruited, a 21-year-old fashion designer from Fort Wayne, Indiana, named Bill Blass, a painter from Brooklyn named Ellsworth Kelly, who would go on to become one of the most celebrated artists in American history, a photographer named Art Kane, who would later shoot some of the most iconic images of the 20th century. They were told almost nothing about their mission, just that their specific skills, their ability to make things look real, were needed more urgently than their ability to fire a rifle. On January 20th, 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was officially activated. Authorized strength, 82 officers and 1,023 men. Average IQ, 119, one of the highest of any unit in the United States Army. They were not told where they were going or what they would do when they got there. The Ghost Army's arsenal was unlike anything the United States military had ever assembled. They had 4 weapons. The first was visual deception. The 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion operated inflatable Sherman tanks, trucks, jeeps, artillery pieces, and even aircraft, each one a rubber shell that 2 men could carry, inflate with a hand pump in under 20 minutes, and camouflage imperfectly enough that aerial reconnaissance would detect them as real. From a distance of more than 300 yards, they were indistinguishable from actual equipment. The second weapon was sonic warfare. The 3,132nd Signal Service Company operated specially fitted trucks with powerful amplifiers capable of broadcasting recorded battle sounds, tank columns, artillery movement, bridge building, truck convoys, audible up to 15 miles away. They had recorded sound libraries of every type of military activity, and they mixed these recordings like a battlefield DJ. The third weapon was fake radio traffic. The The signal company's special unit had spent months studying the communication patterns, rhythms, and even the individual fists, the personal Morse code signatures of real American radio operators. They could impersonate entire divisions in the airwaves, transmitting fake orders, fake movements, fake positions. German intelligence was listening, and they believed every word. The fourth weapon was the one that required the most nerve: human impersonation. Ghost Army soldiers went into French towns and acted as the units they were pretending to be. They wore fake unit patches, drove vehicles with false insignia, had loud conversations in cafes about their division's movements, knowing that German agents were in the room, writing it all down. That was the point. On May 2, 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops shipped out from New York aboard the HMS Mauritania. They arrived in England with truckloads of rubber and recording equipment. They trained, they rehearsed, they inflated and deflated and re-inflated their rubber equipment until the teams could set up a fake armored division in total darkness. They crossed to France 3 weeks after D-Day. While the rest of the Allied army was fighting its way out of the Normandy hedgerows, brutal, bloody, grinding combat, the Ghost Army had its own first assignment. At night, they positioned inflatable equipment along the Normandy coast to simulate a mulberry harbor, the artificial floating dock, using lights to draw German artillery fire away from the real harbor being used to unload Allied supplies. It was unglamorous, dangerous, and it worked. The Germans shelled the wrong location. The real harbor kept operating. The 23rd had arrived. August 1944. The port city of Brest, France. A real American division, the 6th Armored Division, needed to secretly disengage from the siege of Brest and move to support operations elsewhere. If the Germans detected the gap they left behind, the consequences would be catastrophic. An exposed flank in the middle of a siege. The Ghost Army moved in to replace them. Inflatable tanks were positioned in the vacated positions. Sound trucks broadcast the sounds of an armored division still at rest. Signal operators transmitted radio traffic as if the 6th Armored hadn't moved at all. German forces holding out inside Brest watched what they believed was a full American armored division maintaining its positions. The 6th Armored moved safely. The siege held. No gap was exploited. Ghost Army Operations Officer Colonel Clifford Simonson called it the moment the unit came of age. For the men of the 23rd, it was also the moment they understood something about themselves. They were not support troops. They were not staging area workers. They were, in the most literal sense, the men holding the line. With rubber. Between operations, the Ghost Army did something that required a different kind of courage. They went into French towns and played a role. Soldiers wore the insignia of the real units they were impersonating. Vehicles were repainted overnight with new markings. Officers checked into local hotels using false ranks and unit names. They ordered drinks, ate meals, and had conversations. Loud, specific conversations about their division's movements, their commander's plans, the next operation. Because German agents were watching. In nearly every French town, in every cafe and market, there were eyes and ears. One Ghost Army soldier recalled sitting at a bar in a small French town, deliberately discussing the movements of the 2nd Armored Division in enough detail to be useful to any spy in the room. A man at the table beside him was writing it all down. That was the operation. The Ghost Army didn't just have to fool German surveillance equipment. They had to fool actual human beings at close range, under pressure, over days. One mistake, one soldier forgetting which insignia he was wearing, one officer using the wrong unit designation on a phone call, and the entire deception collapsed. In 22 operations, the deception never fully collapsed. September 1944. The German city of Metz. General George Patton's Third Army was stretched dangerously thin across the front, leaving a gap, a 20-mile section of line with almost no one in it. The Ghost Army was ordered to fill it, not to simulate a presence, to actually hold the line. With 1,100 men and no heavy weapons. For 8 days, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops defended a 20-mile section of front along the Moselle River in Luxembourg. They used every deception tool available: inflatable equipment, fake radio traffic, sonic operations. But they also simply stood there, watching, waiting, hoping that the Germans wouldn't probe in force. If they had, there was nothing between a German attack and a catastrophic breach. The Germans didn't probe in force. Ghost Army Operations Officer Simonson called Bettembourg the moment the unit proved itself, not just as deceivers, but as soldiers. They spent 8 days in conditions of real combat danger, holding a line they had no business holding, with equipment designed to fool aircraft, not stop panzer divisions. They held it anyway. Between operations, they drew. The men of the Ghost Army produced thousands of paintings, sketches, and illustrations of the war around them. French villages caught between armies, bombed cathedrals, fellow soldiers sleeping in mud, Belgian children watching convoys pass. The particular quality of winter light over the Ardennes. These were not trained soldiers tolerating art as a hobby. These were artists tolerating war. The tension between what they had been trained to create and what they were now ordered to do ran through every sketchbook. Ellsworth Kelly, who had become one of the most significant abstract artists of the 20th century, sketched obsessively throughout the campaign. His drawings from France and Germany show a mind already working toward the geometric abstraction that would define his career. Bill Blass, who would later build one of America's most celebrated fashion houses, drew uniforms, faces, the cut of a French farm woman's coat in autumn. Art Kane photographed everything. His images of the Ghost Army on campaign remain among the most intimate visual records of any American unit in the Second World War. They were, in a real sense, documenting their own impossible existence. March 1945. The Rhine River, the last natural barrier between the Allied armies and the German heartland. General Dwight Eisenhower needed to cross, but 250,000 German troops were positioned along the opposite bank, watching, waiting. Every crossing point was fortified, every bridge approach was zeroed in by artillery. The Ghost Army was given its most ambitious and most dangerous mission. They were to simulate an entire army corps, 2 full divisions, 30,000 men, massing for a massive crossing at a point north of the city of Viersen. No crossing was planned at Viersen. The real crossing would happen at Wesel, 12 miles to the south, on the night of March 23rd. For 2 weeks, the 23rd worked with a precision and scale they had never attempted. Hundreds of inflatable tanks and vehicles were positioned along the Viersen riverbank. Sound trucks operated for multiple nights running, broadcasting the sounds of bridging equipment being assembled, tank engines warming up, the noise of a massive force preparing to move. Fake headquarters were established and staffed with officers impersonating colonels. Radio traffic simulated frantic last-minute operational planning. Soldiers in the insignia of the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions moved through nearby towns. German intelligence watched it all. German command moved troops to the Viersen sector to meet the coming attack. On the night of March 23rd, the 9th Army crossed the Rhine at Wesel. The Germans were looking the wrong direction. The crossing was achieved with a fraction of the expected casualties. The bridgehead was established before German reserves could respond. Operation Viersen was, by any measure, the most successful deception operation on the Western Front. And it was carried out by 1,100 artists with rubber tanks and a record player. The Ghost Army was not invincible, and they were never safe. They operated with no heavy weapons, no armor of their own. The heaviest armament available to the 23rd was a .50 caliber machine gun. Against a panzer division, that was nothing. In several operations, German units came within dangerously close range of Ghost Army positions. At one location during the Ardennes campaign, German armor advanced to within 2 miles of a 23rd installation. The inflatable tanks would not have stopped anyone. The men quietly packed their equipment and drove away in total darkness. They did not always get away cleanly. 11 men of the Ghost Army were killed in action during the war. Dozens more were wounded. They were captured on occasion, interrogated, and in at least 2 cases, their true mission was never discovered because they held to their cover stories under pressure. They had volunteered, most of them, for a unit they didn't know existed to do a job that had never been done before with tools that had never been used in combat. And they did it 22 times across 4 countries over 16 months, without a single deception operation being compromised to the point of failure. When the war ended in May 1945, the men of the Ghost Army were debriefed, separated, and sent home. And then they were told to forget it. The entire operation, every mission, every deception, every inflatable tank was classified top secret. The men who served were ordered not to speak of their activities, not to their families, not to their friends, not to anyone. For 50 years, they said nothing. They went back to their art schools, their design studios, their advertising agencies. Bill Blass built a fashion empire. Ellsworth Kelly revolutionized American abstract art. Art Kane photographed John Coltrane and Malcolm X in the face of a generation. They gave interviews. They talked about their work, their careers, their art. They did not mention the rubber tanks. It wasn't until 1996 that the classified records of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were finally declassified. By then, many of the men who had served were in their 70s. Some had already died, having never been able to tell a single living person what they had done in the war. A 1985 Smithsonian Magazine article had hinted at the story, but it was the declassification that finally freed the survivors to speak. And when they did, they spoke about it with the particular grace of men who had kept a secret for so long they had almost forgotten they were keeping it. "Our mission was to fool the enemy," said Seymour Nussenbaum, a Ghost Army veteran who had studied art at the Pratt Institute before the war. To put on a big act. They had put on the biggest act of the war, and then they had gone home and been quiet about it for half a century. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops executed 22 large-scale deception operations across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. They operated for 16 months across 4 countries. Military historians estimate that their operations saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. Men who did not die because a German division was looking the wrong direction, or holding position against an enemy that existed only in rubber and sound. In February 2022, 77 years after the war ended, President Joe Biden signed legislation awarding the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor Congress can bestow. By that time, there were almost none of them left. The medals were accepted by family members, by grandchildren who had grown up not knowing what their grandfather had done in the war, by children who had asked and been told, "Not yet." And then the years had passed, and it was too late to ask again. The inflatable tanks are in museums now. deflated and folded, stored behind glass at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. They look like nothing, wrinkled rubber, faded olive drab. They fooled an army, made by artists, operated by soldiers who were also artists, believed by an enemy who never suspected that the Americans would think to fight this way. The greatest deception in the history of modern warfare. And for 50 years, nobody knew. The Ghost Army didn't win the Second World War with firepower. They won their part of it with imagination, with rubber, with recordings, with nerve, and with the particular creative intelligence of men who had been trained to make things look real. Art as a weapon, illusion as strategy. A deception so complete that the men who carried it out weren't allowed to talk about it for the rest of their lives. If you didn't know this story before today, that's exactly why War Decoded exists. Every war has an official story. This isn't that. Subscribe. New documentary every week. And if this episode moved you, share it. These men waited 50 years for someone to tell their story. The least we can do is make sure it reaches people who care.